The moment I opened my eyes and saw the familiar ceiling of my old bedroom, a cold realization washed over me like ice water through my veins. The calendar on my nightstand read March 15th, 2019, exactly 3 years before everything fell apart. My heart hammered against my ribcage as memories of another life, another timeline, crashed over me in devastating waves. I was 25 again, not the broken 28-year-old man who had died alone in a hospital bed, destroyed by betrayal and regret. But more importantly, I knew exactly what Lily was doing right now, at this very moment, in the penthouse apartment I had bought for her. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, muscle memory guiding me to the security app I had installed in the apartment. Back then, or rather, in my previous life, I had never used it, never suspected, never imagined the woman I planned to marry could be capable of such deception. The screen flickered to life, and there she was. Lily, my fiancée of 2 years, wrapped in the arms of my business partner, David Kim, in the bed I had purchased, wearing the silk nightgown I had bought her from Paris. Their laughter echoed through the speakers as David mocked my romantic gestures, calling me a pathetic romantic fool who throws money at everything. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The late nights she claimed to spend at her art studio, the mysterious phone calls she took in another room, the way she recoiled from my touch in recent months. It all made perfect sense now. But unlike my previous life, where this discovery had shattered me completely, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. I had been given the most precious gift imaginable, a second chance to rewrite everything. Lily and I had met at a charity auction 3 years ago, where she had been displaying her paintings as part of a young artist's showcase. She was ethereally beautiful in that delicate, porcelain doll way that made men want to protect her from the world's cruelties. Her long auburn hair caught the gallery lights like spun copper, and when she smiled, dimples appeared in her cheeks that made her look impossibly innocent. I was immediately captivated, not just by her beauty, but by what I perceived as her artistic soul and gentle nature. Back then, I was already successful in my tech consulting business, having built it from nothing after graduating from MIT. At 22, I was hungry for more than just professional achievement. I craved the kind of deep, meaningful connection that my workaholic lifestyle had prevented me from finding. When Lily looked at me with those wide green eyes and spoke passionately about her art, about wanting to make a difference through beauty in an ugly world, I felt like I had finally found my missing piece. Our early relationship was intoxicating in its intensity. She would text me poetry at midnight, leave little sketches tucked into my suit pockets, and look at me like I had personally hung the stars in the sky. On our third date, she took me to her tiny studio apartment in the Arts District, where canvases covered every wall and paint fumes mingled with the scent of jasmine incense. "I've never felt so inspired by another person," she had whispered against my ear as we slow danced to music playing from her paint-splattered radio. I fell completely and utterly in love with the idea of being her muse, her protector, her provider. When she mentioned struggling to pay rent, I quietly arranged for her to receive a grant from a fictional arts foundation. When she admired a vintage easel in an antique store window, it appeared in her studio the next week. When she casually mentioned dreaming of having her own gallery someday, I began researching properties in the most prestigious arts districts. Everything she wanted, I made happen, believing that my devotion was building something beautiful and lasting between us. The warning signs were there from the beginning, scattered like breadcrumbs along a path I was too infatuated to follow. She never introduced me to her friends, claiming they wouldn't understand someone like you. When I surprised her at her studio once, she seemed startled and uncomfortable, quickly ushering me out because she was in a delicate creative phase. Her phone was always face down during our dinners, and she had a habit of stepping outside to take calls, returning with explanations about difficult clients or gallery politics. But everything changed when David Kim entered our lives 6 months into our relationship. I had brought him on as a partner in my consulting firm, impressed by his MBA from Wharton and his aggressive sales tactics that I lacked. David was everything I wasn't. Effortlessly charming, socially connected, and blessed with the kind of natural charisma that made people gravitate toward him. He was also devastatingly handsome, in that obvious way that turned heads on the street, with his perfectly styled black hair, designer stubble, and the kind of smile that had probably broken 1,000 hearts. When I introduced David to Lily at our company's holiday party, I watched something shift in her demeanor. She became more animated, more flirtatious, touching my arm possessively while batting her eyelashes at him in a way that made my stomach clench with unease. "Mike never told me his partner was so charming," she had said, her voice taking on a breathy quality I had never heard before. David, ever the opportunist, had taken her hand and kissed it gallantly, his eyes never leaving hers. From that night forward, everything began to deteriorate slowly, like a photograph left in sunlight. Lily started asking more questions about David, his background, his interests, whether he was seeing anyone. She would casually mention running into him at coffee shops or art galleries, always with perfectly innocent explanations that left me feeling paranoid and possessive. When I tried to address my concerns, she would look at me with wounded eyes and accuse me of being jealous and controlling. David began inserting himself into our relationship with surgical precision. He would suggest double dates with whatever socialite he was seeing that month, always choosing upscale venues where he could showcase his sophistication. During these dinners, I would watch him charm Lily with stories of his travels, his connections in the art world, his plans to expand into creative industries. He had a way of making my technical expertise sound boring by comparison, referring to my work as behind-the-scenes stuff, while positioning himself as the visionary driving our company's growth. The more time we spent together, the more I noticed Lily's behavior changing. She became critical of things she had once claimed to love about me. My romantic gestures were over the top, my devotion was suffocating, and my dreams of our future together were putting too much pressure on her. She started spending more time at gallery events and artist meetups, often returning home late with wine on her breath and stories about people I didn't know. When I suggested attending these events with her, she would claim they were networking opportunities where my presence might seem unprofessional. Meanwhile, David was systematically positioning himself to take control of our business. He scheduled meetings without consulting me, made strategic decisions during my absences, and gradually shifted client relationships toward himself. When I confronted him about feeling excluded from major decisions, he would smooth things over with his characteristic charm, claiming he was simply taking initiative and protecting my interests so I could focus on the technical aspects of our projects. The gaslighting was so subtle, so expertly executed, that I began to doubt my own perceptions. When I expressed concerns about either David or Lily, I was made to feel paranoid, jealous, and emotionally unstable. They had created a perfect system where questioning either of their behaviors reflected poorly on my character, not theirs. I found myself apologizing constantly for being suspicious, for being demanding, for not being grateful enough for everything I had. Looking back now, with the clarity that death and rebirth had provided, I could see exactly how they had orchestrated everything. David had been planning to push me out of the company from the moment he joined, and Lily had been the perfect tool to keep me distracted and emotionally compromised. While I was pouring my heart and resources into what I believed was the love of my life, they were systematically dismantling everything I had built, both professionally and personally. But that was my previous life. This time, I knew exactly what was coming, and I had no intention of playing the role of the naive, devoted fool again. As I sat in my bedroom, watching my betrayers celebrate their deception on my phone screen, I felt something I had never experienced in my previous life: complete emotional detachment from the outcome. Let them have their moment of triumph. Soon, very soon, they would discover that their victim had become their judge, jury, and executioner. I had work to do, and for the first time in either of my lives, I was going to enjoy every single minute of it. The next morning, I walked into our shared office space with a calm I had never possessed in my previous life. David was already there, impeccably dressed as always, reviewing client files with that predatory focus that I had once mistaken for dedication. When he looked up and flashed his $1,000,000 smile, I felt nothing but cold calculation. "Mike, you're here early. Everything okay?" His concern sounded so genuine that in my previous life, I would have felt guilty for harboring any suspicions about him. "Everything's perfect," I replied, settling into my chair and opening my laptop. "Actually, I've been thinking about our expansion plans. I'd like to review all our client contracts and financial projections personally. You know how I am with details." Something flickered across David's expression, so brief that my younger self would never have caught it. But I saw it clearly now. Irritation masked quickly by practiced charm. "Of course, but you know I've been handling most of the client relations. Maybe we should focus your talents where they're most valuable, the technical development side." In my previous timeline, I had accepted this reasoning, believing David was protecting me from the mundane business aspects, so I could focus on innovation. Now I recognized it for what it was, a systematic exclusion from my own company. "I appreciate your concern, but I think it's time I got more involved in every aspect of our business. After all, it's still my company." The emphasis on "my" was subtle, but unmistakable. David's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Partnership, Mike. We're partners, remember?" "Of course, partners who should be completely transparent with each other." I maintained steady eye contact, letting him know that something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. That afternoon, I called Lily to arrange dinner at Chateau Marmont, the same restaurant where, in my previous life, she had told me she needed space to find herself. 3 days before I discovered her affair. This time, I had different plans entirely. She arrived 15 minutes late, as always, looking stunning in a black cocktail dress that I had bought her for her birthday. Her auburn hair was styled in loose waves, and she wore the diamond earrings I had surprised her with after landing our biggest client. Everything about her appearance was calculated to remind me of my investment in her, to trigger my protective instincts and generosity. "Darling, you look tense," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her perfume, Tom Ford Black Orchid, another gift from me, filled my nostrils. "Is everything all right with the business?" "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about us," I said, taking a sip of the wine I had ordered, a 2015 Barolo that cost more than most people's monthly rent. In my previous life, I had chosen expensive wines to impress her. Tonight, I simply wanted to enjoy what would be my last meal as an engaged man. Her green eyes sharpened with interest, and she leaned forward with that practiced expression of loving concern that had once melted my heart. "What about us, Mike? You know you can tell me anything." "I've been thinking about our wedding plans," I began, watching her face carefully. "The venue, the guest list, the timeline, it's a lot to coordinate." Relief washed over her features, and she relaxed back into her chair. "Oh, Mike, you scared me for a moment. Yes, it is overwhelming, but that's why we have wedding planners. Though I have been thinking we might want to push the date back a little. You know, with your business expanding and my gallery preparations." In my previous life, these delays had frustrated me, but I had attributed them to her perfectionist nature and desire for everything to be flawless. Now I understood they were stalling tactics, buying time for her real plans to unfold. Plans that involved David and my complete professional and personal destruction. "Actually, I think you're absolutely right," I said, watching surprise flicker across her face. "In fact, I think we should take a complete break from wedding planning. Focus on ourselves as individuals for a while." The surprise deepened into confusion, then concern. This wasn't the desperate, clingy Mike she had learned to manipulate. "What do you mean, exactly?" "I mean, I think we've been moving too fast. We got engaged after only 18 months together." Maybe we should take some time to really get to know ourselves and what we want before making such a permanent commitment. Lily's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine glass tighter. Mike, this doesn't sound like you at all. Is someone influencing you? Is David putting ideas in your head about commitment? The irony of her mentioning David was almost too perfect. This has nothing to do with David. This is about us and what's best for both of us in the long term. But I love you, she said, her voice taking on that breathy, vulnerable quality that had always been my weakness. Her eyes began to glisten with carefully controlled tears. I don't understand where this is coming from. Yesterday you were talking about honeymoon destinations, and now you want to postpone everything? I'm not postponing anything, I said quietly, reaching into my jacket pocket. I'm ending it. The engagement ring box sat on the white tablecloth between us like a small black bomb. Lily stared at it as if it might explode, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for her to control. Shock, anger, calculation, desperation. You can't be serious, she whispered, but her voice lacked genuine pain. Instead, there was something else, panic about her carefully laid plans crumbling. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I pushed the box closer to her. This belongs to you. I hope you find what you're really looking for. What happened next was a masterclass in manipulation that I had been blind to in my previous life. Lily's tears came in earnest now, and she reached across the table to grasp my hands with desperate intensity. Mike, please, let's talk about this. I know I've been distant lately, but it's just stress from the gallery preparations. You know how much pressure I've been under. Don't throw away everything we've built together over some temporary rough patch. What exactly have we built together, Lily? I asked, my voice remaining calm despite the storm of emotions she was trying to create. Really think about it. What have we actually built as a team? The question seemed to stun her into silence, because the truth was, she had built nothing with me. She had simply been the recipient of everything I had built for her. The apartment, the art supplies, the gallery connections, the financial security, the social status that came with being engaged to a successful entrepreneur. We've built a relationship, she said finally, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. No, Lily, I built a fantasy, and you've been a very talented actress playing the role I wanted you to play. I stood up, placing enough cash on the table to cover our meal and a generous tip. I hope the performance was worth it. As I walked away, I could hear her calling my name with increasing desperation, but I didn't turn around. Other diners were starting to stare, and Lily's carefully maintained public image was beginning to crack under the pressure of genuine panic. 3 days later, while Lily was undoubtedly scrambling to figure out how to salvage her plans, I received a call from my lawyer. The private investigator I had hired had worked with remarkable efficiency, compiling a comprehensive file on both Lily and David's activities over the past 6 months. Bank records, phone logs, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and most importantly, photographic evidence that would make their betrayal undeniable in any legal proceeding. The evidence revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. David had been systematically moving our business relationships to a shell company he had established, using his charm and my trusting nature to position himself for a complete takeover. Meanwhile, Lily had been using the money I gave her to fund not just her art career, but expensive dates and gifts for David. They had been planning to announce their relationship immediately after David successfully forced me out of my own company, and Lily had secured access to the trust fund my grandmother had left me, which would only become available upon my marriage. But their most devastating betrayal was yet to come. In my original timeline, David would have presented me with doctored evidence of embezzlement, claiming I had been skimming company funds to support Lily's expensive lifestyle. The fabricated evidence would have destroyed my reputation and landed me in legal trouble while positioning him as the whistleblower who had reluctantly exposed his partner's criminal behavior. This time, however, I had documentation proving that every penny supposedly embezzled had actually been legitimate business expenses or personal funds that David himself had redirected. The real criminal activity was his, and I had every receipt, every bank transfer, every forged signature necessary to prove it. As I sat in my lawyer's office, reviewing the evidence that would soon destroy both of their lives, I felt something I had never experienced before: complete peace with the concept of justice. In my previous life, I had been the victim of their calculated cruelty. This time, I would be the architect of their consequences. "Mr. Thompson," my lawyer said, closing the thick file, "this is more than enough evidence for both criminal charges and civil litigation. Are you prepared to move forward?" I thought about Lily, probably calling and texting desperately, trying to understand what had gone wrong with her perfect plan. I thought about David, likely scrambling to accelerate his timeline now that his primary manipulation tool had been removed from the equation. "Yes," I said, signing the papers that would set everything in motion. "Let's give them exactly what they deserve." The first sign that David realized something had shifted came exactly 1 week after I broke off my engagement. I was in my office, deliberately arriving early and staying late to observe his growing desperation, when he burst through my door without knocking, a breach of professional courtesy that revealed just how rattled he had become. "Mike, we need to talk," he said, his usually perfect composure cracking around the edges. His designer suit was slightly wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of expensive concealer could hide. "Lily called me. She's pretty upset about what happened between you two." "I'm sure she is," I replied, without looking up from my computer screen, where I was reviewing the forensic accounting report my team had prepared. Breakups are always difficult. "But Mike, come on, you guys were perfect together. Everyone could see how much she loved you." The lies rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, but I could hear the underlying panic. Without Lily as his inside source and emotional leverage over me, his entire plan was falling apart. "Were we?" I finally looked up, meeting his eyes with a calmness that clearly unsettled him. "I'm curious, David. In your opinion, what exactly made us so perfect together?" The question caught him off guard. He had prepared for emotional manipulation, anger, or desperate attempts to reconcile. He hadn't prepared for philosophical inquiry. "Well, she made you happy. You were always talking about her, buying her things, planning your future together." "That's interesting," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because looking back, I realize I did all the talking, all the buying, all the planning. What exactly did she contribute to our relationship?" David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Because the truth was, Lily had contributed nothing but her presence and her performance. She had been a beautiful, expensive ornament that I had decorated my life with, believing that her beauty somehow validated my success. "Look, Mike, I think you're just going through a rough patch. Maybe you should reconsider." "Actually, I've never been thinking more clearly," I interrupted. "Speaking of which, I've been reviewing our company finances. There are some discrepancies I'd like to discuss with you." The color drained from David's face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Discrepancies? What kind of discrepancies?" "The Morrison account, for instance. According to our records, they paid their invoice 3 months ago, but the money never appeared in our main business account. Do you know anything about that?" David's throat worked convulsively as he swallowed. There might have been a processing delay. You know how these corporate payments can be. I'll look into it right away." "That's thoughtful of you," I said, pulling out a thick manila folder. "But I've already looked into it. Along with the Patterson contract, the Riverside Development Project, and about 15 other accounts that seem to have similar processing delays." I could actually see the moment when David realized his world was about to implode. His face went from pale to gray, and his hand started to tremble slightly. The confident predator who had systematically worked to destroy my life was suddenly revealed as nothing more than a desperate, cornered animal. "Mike, I can explain everything. There are perfectly reasonable explanations for any accounting irregularities. Sometimes in business, you have to make quick decisions, move money around to handle cash flow issues." "David," I said quietly, standing up and walking around my desk to face him directly. "I know exactly what you've been doing. I know about the shell company. I know about the redirected payments. I know about the forged signatures on the bank authorizations. Most importantly, I know about your plan to frame me for embezzlement while you walked away with my company." The confession hit him like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, catching himself against the doorframe. How could you possibly know about your plan?" I smiled, and I could see my expression reflected in his terrified eyes. It wasn't the smile of the naive, trusting partner he had been manipulating. This was something entirely different, something cold and precise and absolutely without mercy. "David, the beautiful thing about being a tech consultant is that I understand systems, digital trails, security protocols, data recovery. Did you really think you could steal from me electronically and leave no trace?" His breath came in short, panicked gasps. "Mike, listen to me. We can work this out. We're partners. We can find a solution that works for both of us." "We were partners," I corrected. Past tense. "And there is a solution that works for me. It's called justice." Before he could respond, my office door opened again, and 2 men in dark suits entered. David spun around, his face a mask of confusion and growing terror. "David Kim?" the taller man asked, pulling out a badge. "I'm Detective Rodriguez, LAPD Financial Crimes Division. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the handcuffs clicked around David's wrists, he looked back at me with an expression of absolute disbelief. "You can't do this to me, Mike. We're friends. We built this company together." "No, David. I built this company. You just tried to steal it." I watched as they read him his rights, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "And we were never friends. Friends don't systematically destroy each other's lives for profit." 3 hours after David's arrest, my phone began ringing incessantly. Lily had obviously heard the news and was in full panic mode. I let it go to voicemail for the first dozen calls, then finally answered when her desperation reached what sounded like hysteria. "Mike, what have you done?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "David called me from jail. Jail, Mike! How could you do this to him?" "I didn't do anything to David," I said calmly. "David did everything to himself. I simply made sure there were consequences for his actions." "This is insane. You're destroying an innocent man because you're angry about our breakup. This is psychotic behavior, Mike." The irony was breathtaking. The woman who had been systematically betraying me while planning to steal my inheritance was calling me psychotic for holding her co-conspirator accountable for his crimes. "Lily, David stole over $200,000 from my company. He forged my signature on bank documents. He set up illegal shell companies to hide assets. None of that has anything to do with our relationship. These are simply the natural consequences of his criminal behavior." "But he wouldn't have done any of that if you hadn't been so obsessed with controlling everything. You pushed him to this." There it was, the gaslighting that had destroyed me in my previous life, the attempt to make me responsible for their betrayal, to convince me that their cruelty was somehow my fault. In my previous timeline, this manipulation had worked. I had actually believed that my love and generosity had somehow driven them to hurt me. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I was controlling. I controlled my bank accounts, my business decisions, and my personal relationships so poorly that I allowed 2 parasites to nearly destroy everything I had built. But that's a mistake I'll never make again. Mike, please, let me come over. Let's talk about this face to face. I know we can work through this together." "There's nothing to work through, Lily. You made your choice when you decided to betray me with my business partner. David made his choice when he decided to steal from me. Now you both get to live with the consequences of those choices." "I never betrayed you," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "David and I are just friends. We've never—" "Lily," I interrupted. "Do you remember the penthouse security system I had installed? The one I told you was just for monitoring deliveries when we weren't home?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have video footage of every single time David has been in that apartment over the past 4 months. Every conversation, every kiss, every moment you spent in bed together while planning how to destroy my life. I have recordings of you two laughing about my pathetic romantic gestures and strategizing about the best way to access my trust fund." The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "Mike, I can explain—" "You don't need to explain anything. The footage explains itself quite clearly. The question is, what happens next?" "What do you mean?" I looked out my office window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, David was sitting in a jail cell, probably still trying to figure out how his perfect plan had backfired so completely. And here was Lily, finally understanding that her performance had not only failed, but had been recorded for posterity. "I mean, David's criminal trial will be very public. Evidence will be presented. Videos might be shown. Your face might become quite recognizable in certain circles as the woman who helped a man steal from his business partner while sleeping with both of them." "You wouldn't," she breathed. "I wouldn't what? Tell the truth about what you did? Present evidence of crimes that were committed against me? Why wouldn't I do that?" "Because you loved me. Because what we had was real, even if it ended badly." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She actually seemed to believe her own lies, to think that her performance had been genuine enough to earn her some kind of protection from the consequences of her actions. "Lily," I said softly, "what we had was never real. It was a business transaction where I paid for the illusion of love, and you provided that illusion in exchange for money, gifts, and social status. The only difference is that I thought I was in a relationship, while you knew you were running a con." The line went dead, and I knew she had finally understood that her reign of manipulation was over. Tomorrow, she would wake up in a world where her actions had consequences, where her beauty and tears couldn't undo the choices she had made, and where the man she had underestimated held all the cards. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse of my new headquarters building, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and crimson. The company I had rebuilt from the ashes of David's betrayal was now worth 3 times what it had been before, and I had accomplished something I never could have imagined in my previous life: complete peace with my past and genuine excitement for my future. The legal proceedings had unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated. David's trial had been a media spectacle that destroyed not only his freedom, but his reputation so thoroughly that he would never work in business again. The evidence was so overwhelming that he had eventually pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence, but not before the prosecution had presented enough video footage and financial records to ensure that everyone in our industry knew exactly what kind of person he was. His 8-year prison sentence felt almost anticlimactic after watching his complete social and professional annihilation. Lily's fate had been more subtle, but equally devastating. While she hadn't committed any crimes that could be prosecuted, the scandal had made her radioactive in the art world she had desperately wanted to join. Gallery owners who had once courted her favor now refused to return her calls. The wealthy collectors who had attended her exhibitions out of curiosity about Mike Thompson's talented fiancé had vanished the moment the videos surfaced, showing her laughing about my pathetic devotion while planning to steal my inheritance. But the most satisfying consequence had been entirely of her own making. In a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, Lily had given an interview to a gossip magazine claiming that I had been controlling and emotionally abusive, and that her affair with David had been an attempt to escape my manipulation. The interview backfired spectacularly when I released a carefully edited compilation of her own words from the security footage. Hours of her disparaging my character, mocking my romantic gestures, and strategizing about how to maximize her financial gain from our relationship. The video went viral, not because people were interested in celebrity drama, but because it perfectly captured something that resonated with viewers: the cold, calculating nature of modern transactional relationships disguised as love. Lily became an unwitting symbol of everything people feared about dating in the digital age, and the public backlash was swift and merciless. "Mr. Thompson?" My assistant's voice came through the intercom, interrupting my reflection. "Your dinner guest has arrived." I smiled, straightening my tie as I prepared for what would be the most important meeting of either of my lifetimes. "Send her up, please." The elevator doors opened to reveal Elena Rodriguez, Detective Rodriguez's younger sister, and the woman who had unknowingly become the reason I was grateful for every moment of pain I had endured. We had met 3 months ago at a charity auction where she was displaying her architectural drawings for a housing project for homeless veterans. Unlike Lily's ethereal, fragile beauty, Elena possessed something far more attractive: genuine substance. She was beautiful in an entirely different way. Strong, intelligent, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that sparkled with actual humor rather than calculated charm. When she smiled, it was because she was genuinely happy, not because she was performing happiness to achieve a goal. And when she spoke about her work, her passion was real, not a carefully constructed persona designed to attract wealthy benefactors. "This view is incredible," she said, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "But I have to admit, I'm curious why you wanted to have dinner here instead of a restaurant." "Because I wanted to share something with you," I said, opening the bottle of wine I had selected. Not because it was expensive, but because I had researched her preferences and learned that she genuinely enjoyed Pinot Noir, and because restaurants are full of people who might overhear conversations that are meant to be private. Elena turned from the window, raising an eyebrow with the kind of skeptical intelligence that would have terrified my younger self, but now absolutely delighted me. "That sounds mysteriously dramatic, Mike Thompson." "It's going to sound crazy," I said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "But I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone else. Something about second chances and the strange ways the universe sometimes gives us exactly what we need." Over the next hour, I told her everything. About my previous life, about the betrayal and my death, about waking up 3 years in the past with complete knowledge of what was to come. I expected her to think I was delusional, to make polite excuses and disappear from my life forever. Instead, she listened with the kind of focused attention that I now recognized as genuine interest rather than performed engagement. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "You know," she said finally, "my brother mentioned something interesting about your case. He said it was the most perfectly documented fraud he'd ever investigated. Like someone had been prepared for exactly the kind of evidence they would need months before the crimes were even discovered." My heart stopped. What did he think about that? Elena smiled, and I realized she was even more extraordinary than I had imagined. "He thought it was lucky. I think it was something else entirely." She leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine with complete sincerity. "I think it was justice. You believe me?" "I believe that some people deserve second chances," she said. "And I believe that some people use those chances to become the best versions of themselves." The Mike Thompson who could orchestrate that kind of justice isn't the same man who would have been fooled by those two in the first place. 3 months later, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. David's prison had a work release program where inmates could write letters for various businesses to earn a small wage. The letterhead indicated it was from a company that provided testimonial letters for dating websites. The irony was almost too perfect. The man who had helped destroy my faith in love was now writing fake romantic testimonials for other people's dating profiles. But the real surprise came when I opened what I thought was a business proposal and found a handwritten letter from David himself. "Mike, I know I have no right to contact you, and I know you probably never want to hear from me again. But I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I need you to know something. What Lily and I did to you wasn't just wrong. It was evil. We took someone who loved genuinely and completely, and we used that love to destroy you for our own profit. I can't undo what we did, but I can tell you that every single day in here, I think about the man you were and wonder how different things might have been if I had been half as decent as you. I heard through mutual acquaintances that you're doing well, and that makes me genuinely happy. You deserved so much better than what we gave you. I hope you find someone who loves you the way you loved Lily, genuinely, completely, and without agenda. You deserved that then, and you deserve it now." I read the letter twice, then placed it in my desk drawer next to the engagement ring Lily had never returned. Not as mementos of pain, but as reminders of how far I had traveled from the man I used to be. That evening, Elena and I were having dinner at her apartment, a cozy space filled with architectural drawings, engineering textbooks, and the kind of organized chaos that comes from someone who is passionate about their work. As we cleaned dishes together, she suddenly turned to me with a mischievous expression. "I have something to confess," she said, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "Another confession? This relationship is getting very mysterious." "I knew who you were before we met at the charity auction," she admitted. "My brother had told me about your case, and I was curious about the man who had turned the tables on two people who thought they were so much smarter than everyone else." I stopped washing the plate in my hands. "You sought me out?" "I researched you," she said, completely unrepentant. "I wanted to meet the person who had that kind of strategic intelligence and moral clarity, and I wanted to see if the man who could orchestrate perfect justice was someone worth knowing." "And your conclusion?" Elena stepped closer, and I could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean that reminded me of morning rain. "My conclusion is that the universe gave you a second chance because it knew exactly what kind of man you would become with the right motivation." When she kissed me, it was nothing like the calculated performances I had received from Lily. This was real, spontaneous, and filled with the kind of genuine affection that I had forgotten existed in the world. Later, as we sat on her couch discussing her latest housing project, I realized something that filled me with profound gratitude. I was living a life that my previous self could never have imagined. Not just because of the material success or the perfect justice I had achieved, but because I had learned to recognize authentic love when I found it. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it without thinking. It was from an unknown number, but the words made my blood run cold. "I know what you did. I know about the rebirth. We need to talk. L." Elena noticed my expression immediately. "What's wrong?" I stared at the message, my mind racing. In all my careful planning, in all my strategic preparation, there was one possibility I had never considered, that I might not be the only one who had been given a second chance. "Mike?" Elena's voice was concerned now. "What is it?" I looked at her, this remarkable woman who had chosen to love me, knowing exactly who I was and what I had done, and I made a decision that would have been impossible for my younger self. "It's nothing I can't handle," I said, deleting the message and turning off my phone. "But I think our story just got a lot more interesting." As Elena curled up beside me, Trusting and unafraid, I smiled at the ceiling. Let Lily play whatever game she thought she was playing. I had learned something in my second life that she could never understand. When you have something real worth protecting, there is no limit to what you can accomplish. And this time, I was ready for anything.